Hey everyone, and welcome back. Just a brief aside, this will be a video strictly dedicated to my favorite color in all of Magic at the moment, and that is the color red. Red holds a few things that I particularly love, and we're going to talk about them in this video. Red being a very all or nothing kind of color that also serves to function as kind of the deal damage to anything kind of thing. That's really what red is in the game of Magic, and that's partially why I love it, because it's both simple yet effective. There's no tricksiness, so to speak, when you're trying to do things. However, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have that. It just tends to lean more towards a very honest game plan of you're going to take damage or your things are going to take damage. And I really personally like that, not for the honesty part of it, but because it allows me to make decisions more based on known information only and not really try and play like there's something I have to deal with other than really when I'm going for a win. And I really do appreciate that kind of play style, as it allows me to more think and consider what my opponents are going to do and how their board is affecting them. As this is a love letter to the color red in Magic, I figure I should specify as to why I really like red so much. Red tends to be my most favorite color because A, it's simple and effective, I mentioned that earlier, and B, it has interaction for most parts of the game, and those cards tend to be unique, interesting, or fun, and Chaos, the playstyle that usually is kind of frowned upon, sits there, but is oftentimes in red useful as a way to bring everyone to a level that you're at, because I honestly think that red is one of the weakest solo colors without basically a few specific cards. Personally, I believe red's weaknesses are also sort of how you can build to its strengths, and what I mean by that is when picking your commander, you tend to build commanders that can make up for a weakness that your color pie or your strategy really has, but with red, most of its strategies tend to lack value. And because of that, a lot of commanders that people will play in red either generate value themselves or are so efficient and so powerful or so fast that they will eventually beat your opponents with that raw advantage, but not necessarily value. So my favorites are actually based more around the circumventing of not having enough value or changing play enough that essentially I catch up in value. Now, just an aside, these are not necessarily the most powerful commanders in red or even the most popular. They are just the ones that I enjoy the most because, again, they shift the game into a way that I like or allow me to do things that normally red doesn't do, or if they are doing things that red wants to do, they're doing them so well, it's like hard, in my opinion, to compare them to the others. Moving on to the first of the red commanders, just briefly, it is Rionya, Fire Dancer. She is a human wizard for 5 mana, a 3/4 body that at the beginning of your turn you make token copies of another creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of instants and sorceries you cast. She does the kind of typical Kiki-Jiki thing, and originally Kiki-Jiki was going to be here. However, I ended up deciding to not run Kiki-Jiki in this list because, well, he's popular, but it tends to generate a little bit more hate, and the strategy, in my opinion, isn't the same. And I really prefer Rionya's playstyle over Kiki-Jiki's, because there is a payoff for once you start going and using all these explosive turns like Red likes to do. Personally, I find that Rionya's combos are just as good, if not easier, than Kiki's, and Kiki does have more simple lines. I will 100% be honest, that is true. However, I do find it more interesting to be able to storm up to something and then getting a payoff for having a storm count with instants and sorceries. I find that really unique, and Rionya is one of the only commanders that I know of that even cares about your instants and sorcery count, or really your storm count at all. So I really do enjoy her, and I really enjoy playing the deck. It's one that this is actually one of the ones I've built several times, and it tends to sit stronger, it's more powerful, but it's doing all the things that I really want to do, because I love casting instants and sorceries. That's like Christmas for me when I get to do that a lot. But, it's never good for my opponents. They always try and stop me. So there you go. The next mono red commander I have a deep appreciation and love for is Baloth Baratil, and if you know much about the rulings around Baloth Baratil, you'll know they did him rather dirty. However, that didn't change the fact that the deck is still really cool, and the version that I ran with Baloth, because again, it's a background commander, is I ran it with Noble Heritage, so it would keep getting bigger and goading more and more things, and then you could kind of incentivize your opponents by saying, well, if you make your thing bigger, it has to attack anyway, for the most part, or you can avoid having to attack your opponent, but you won't really be able to hurt me, and that deck was super cool. I really enjoyed that one, but again, the rulings around it kind of frustrated me out of playing this commander all that much. And what Baloth does is it goads all of your opponent's things that are smaller than it, as long as it is larger than they are. And that means that temporary buffing will only temporarily goad with the current ruling. And at the time when I played it, it was not being played like that. It was being played as a buff equals more goad turn. And then, you'd goad for a turn. That's not how it actually works, according to the ruling. Anyway, this card is awesome, and I love it because it's so disruptive to a lot of people's game plans, and as more and more good creatures have been coming out, because Wizards has started really loving making good creatures, this has been more and more effective of a strategy, because they tend to have small bodies, or even life total, or health to damage. Power toughness, that's the actual term. But basically what it's done is allowed that Baloth has gotten stronger in a game regardless of what's going on, because again, you can do all these stupid things and your commanders are just doing the goad thing while you can have some other strategy you're building towards. And I personally really loved Baloth, even as just a mono red commander. I tried doing it with Popular Entertainer because goad is goad and goad is funny. So it ended up being fine. But Baloth as a mono red commander is still one of the coolest designs for just a commander in general, in my opinion, in the modern, more recent card design pool, including Rionia. And so I personally like him because of how disruptive he is to standard gameplay, and that's why I like playing Baloth. The next red commander, as instead of saying it's mono red, which would be inaccurate because it's very rare you're going to make a mono red deck with either this one or Baloth, is Jeska Thrice Reborn. I loved this card. I only really tried it because I had a deck a long time ago where I called it the roulette, where I had a bunch of commanders that were in the deck and I would roll a dice. It was a d20 and I would make whatever the thing I had the commander, and I had Jeska, and I literally just played Jeska as the commander, and that deck was wicked fun. So much so that I built several iterations of Jeska in the command zone, not even just in red, in several colors. I've done Jeska Malcolm, Jeska Kedis, Jeska Falthus. Oh my goodness, the list goes on. Those decks were crazy fun, and I love Jeska. She's so interactive. The minus targeting anything you want, doing funny stuff. The zero working on your opponent's creatures is absolutely hysterical. The amount of times that you can get people by just saying, all right, I'm going to zero this thing that I can safely make go through. Let's say you're playing white or blue or whatever, green even, say, all right, cool. Say attack your opponent. They'll be like, okay, cool, but I'm going to attack the one I choose. I'm like, cool, as long as it's not me, whatever. And you're like, all right, here's a buff. And the person, forces them to block. Then you give it trample, and then you buff it again, and it does triple damage. It's hilarious. It creates a ton of fun play lines. It gives red this opportunity to be more conversational about their game plan and strategy, and I personally find that way more interesting than just saying, all right, well, do the thing, pass the turn, maybe exile some cards, probably do nothing. However, with Jeska, you create a little bit more of a conversation where you're trying to do a little bit more politics by saying, well, I can play through this, but my opponents can't. And what's stopping me from really helping them to stop you, or what's stopping me from keeping this in play to stop them? And I love those kind of lines of play. They generate such an interesting play space and consideration for a bunch of different cards. So, Jeska Thrice Reborn, awesome. 10 out of 10, love this commander. Our next commander, rolling with the commanders that have some sort of mechanic that usually make them an additional color, is Breaches. I personally love stolen strategy effects, where not literally stolen strategy, but stealing other people's cards and mill. I think is probably my favorite strategy, more because it's funny, and I enjoy watching people see what they could have and not have, and they're kind of like, well, you suck, but, it's a graveyard, we can usually interact with that, but you... Anyway, so I really like Breaches because it allows you to kind of play that mill game plan, but with pirates, which is an interesting tribe that doesn't see a lot of support, other than a few particular ones that are quite good, and you know which one I'm talking about, looking at you, Dockside. Anyway, Breaches itself allows for this kind of steely, piratey, thefty effect game plan that personally I'm a huge fan of. I really enjoy being able to just say, all right, cool, hit you with a Menace 3/3, whatever. Also, I'm going to steal the top card of your deck. And sometimes you hit people's win cons, or you have ways to ping your opponents with something that's now a pirate or is a pirate. Either way, the way that Breaches works is damage, not combat damage, to steal your opponent's stuff, or the cards off the top of their library, pardon me. And I find that to be so cool and so interesting. Like, I genuinely have been considering building a Breaches Thrasios deck for kind of a higher slash fringe power deck to try and really see what I can do with it, because there's a lot you can do with these kind of things, and I am a huge fan of that. For a long time, I also had things like Breaches Malcolm. I had Breaches plus, oh goodness, it was Perforos, where you turn Perforos into a pirate using some effect in blue, because I think the commander was like, I think it was Silas, because I wanted to be able to reanimate the Maskwood Nexus if possible. I've tried a lot of stuff with this deck, and Breaches has always been, like Jessica, one of those weird ones that I try. Every time I play it, I love it, and then I literally forget about it for like months or years even. I think it's been a year is the longest I've forgotten about Breaches, but I really find Breaches playstyle fun. And I find that since Red has the problem of usually having decent cards, but there's always better cards of what it's doing in other colors, finding those cards from your opponent is so much more satisfying, because then A, they don't have it for you, and B, you have it for them. And I really, really like doing that. Moving back into true mono red commanders, Chisgoria Forge Tyrant is one that really was never on my radar until I started actually doing research for this video. And I figured I'd talk about one that I've never personally played. There is another one that's coming next that's also the same way, but I knew its existence. But this one's really interesting. Chisgoria Forge Tyrant is actually an affinity for Artifacts Dragon with flying and haste. So it's usually going to cost 3 because it's 6 red, red, red. So it's pretty easy to cast. And when it attacks, you exile the top 5 cards of your library, and you can play an artifact exiled this way from among them. I think it's 1 per attack. And you give it affinity for artifacts, so it's free? That's insane to me. Granted, you run into the issue of, what if I hit 3 great artifacts that I want to cast all of? Well, you're kind of SOL, but at the same time, you probably paid 3 mana for a free artifact, because, I mean, this thing does have flying and haste. And it's a 5/4, so I guess, like, equipment strategies could be viable too. I don't know, I'm more speculating on this one. I personally find its design to be super cool. I didn't even know this card existed until I was checking EDHREC to see, like, you know, what other things I may have missed off the top of my head. Anyway, this one's super cool. It allows for kind of this weird actual card advantage engine in your command zone. And the fact that it does have cost reduction too is not even what sold me on it, I'll be completely honest. But the fact that you can have more free artifacts from your nearly free flying hasting dragon that cares about a strategy that apparently just snowballs out of control, and that sounds like crazy awesome to me. And there's probably some BS you can do with this. I get that smell from it, you know, the stink of combo. So I'm a huge fan of this thing. Anyway, Chisgoria, it's a fascinating design space, and I personally really like it, and dragons are always cool. So it's one to look out for. At least from me, I may talk about it more in the future, or if I don't, it's probably because I forgot about it. Last and certainly not least, we have the Red Terror, a 4-drop Tyrannid, who is a 4/3. It has a special effect called Advanced Species, where whenever a red source you control deals damage to one or more permanents and or players, put a counter on it. This thing screams big beats and simple strategies that clear the board. I love it. It's kinda all in, but it tends to build back up rather quickly, at least it appears to. And I think that would be really fun. It's like the most red commander you could possibly make, because its strategy is completely telegraphed. You know, you're going to have to deal with all of its BS that it's going to do. And eventually, when it starts doing stuff, it itself hitting will make itself bigger, which I find hilarious. Because even if you block it, it still gets bigger. And it's on damage, so simultaneously, so I think if it takes lethal damage, the trigger will happen and it'll die before it gets the counter. I'm unsure, I'll have to check the rulings, but I'm almost positive that's how it's going to be. Anyway, this is a super cool commander. It's super straightforward. The art is cool. Warhammer 40k is super cool as well. And I just am excited to try this. I am holding on to it right now in the pre-con, and I am holding for either a rainy day, maybe a thing I'll give away at an event I might host in the future. I don't really know. Anyway, this thing looks super cool, and eventually I would love to build it. Otherwise, this is definitely one of like the quintessential red commanders, at least in my opinion. Shifting into red itself, or shifting back into red itself, I should say, it has a number of strengths that tend to really attract people to it. Me particularly, I liked all the strengths that it had and all the variety that it offered, which is, again, one of its strengths. It really allows people to kind of express themselves in the deck because the 99 is more important than the commander for the most part in most decks. There's a few exceptions, but you've probably heard of them. They'll flash on screen for just a second. You'll know who I'm talking about. Anyway, these are the looks at kind of what the strengths of red really are.